Media. As consumers, we are bombarded by it at every turn, like the Incredible Hulk being bombarded by gamma rays. But what makes some media endure, while others are banished to the forgotten black hole of obscurity, never to be heard from again? Who or what decides this? Hetero life mates Steve and Yahel want to know, and they want to know now. This is Obscurity Now. And what's up, Obscurians? It's time for another episode of Obscurity Now, the show where we take a look at weird and outer-worldly media, and then we decide if they should be remembered for all of humankind or tossed into the black void of space, never to be heard from again. My name is Steve, and with me is my co-host. He was kicked out of the Men in Black for controversial tweets.
It is Yahel. And Steve, how are you doing on the 29th day of the human calendar in January?
I'm doing great, but I just feel like this angle is just not right. Hold on, let me. Is this better? How's this? Is this?
Yeah. That now you're on your way to making a documentary.
Right, an award-winning one. We're just gonna rename this Steve and Yahel Unplugged on Obscure Media. And it's funny. Okay, so I guess we might as well get into it. We are talking about the documentary, paranormal documentary, which is called. You want to take it?
It's called. Hold on. It's isn't it Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs? I believe is the full title.
He's got an acoustic guitar.
Off the top of my memory,
and he's singing the whole time, just like on MTV back in the '90s. Let's see, who do we got here? We got some people showed up in the chat.
Creative KV is here. He says, she says it's that kind of stream. Some guys I check in from time to time. Well, this is you picked a good one because we're not doing the usual format. We're not going through the paces of an episode or something we watched in order. We're just going to kind of have a freewheeling discussion about Dan Akroyd's insane film about UFOs.
Right. And a discussion about the paranormal in general. We're both excited for this because, we've been doing this show for over 2 years, and we just haven't really gone down this paranormal alley before.
I mean, unless we count Baywatch Nights, although...
but that's...
I think that's about as much of a documentary as this.
Yeah, I was about to say, Baywatch Nights is not presented as truth or facts or as a documentary, though I like to believe that it is. I like to believe that old Hasselhoff is out there every night wandering around in darkened rooms trying to find his way out and picking up weird girls who think they're aliens. I mean...
Yeah, Creative KV in the chat said the man referring to Dan Akroyd seems really crazy. Seems really smart but crazy. LMAO. I'm a big Ghostbusters fan. And I'm actually a big Dan Akroyd fan in general.
Me too.
I think he's a really funny guy, really interesting guy to listen to, even if what he's telling you is absolutely bonkers. But what are your feelings on Dan Akroyd as an actor, producer, writer, comedian?
Oh man, I mean, I can't remember a time where I wasn't watching something made or starring Dan Akroyd. Like, those movies of his, like Trading Places and Blues Brothers, seems like they were always on TV or maybe like HBO back in the day. I mean, I loved the Blues Brothers because that was a movie about a band, and I wanted to be as I wanted to be a musician for the longest time.
I was in a band with you, as a matter of fact.
What? Yeah. And I mean, and you get that, and later I discovered some of his Saturday Night Live stuff, and he's a writer and an actor, which those are other sort of pursuits of mine. So yeah, I mean, all in all, I definitely consider myself a Dan Akroyd fan, and it's pretty interesting, just sort of the avenues he's gone down as he ages gracefully, basically.
Yes. Should we get into Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFO, Steve, or So you've never seen this, right? Because I brought this to your attention.
Absolutely not. I mean, have you watched it all the way through? How did you even find out about it? I figured
Yeah.
this would be top secret stuff. Once it got out to the masses,
somehow the
yeah, it
government
slipped.
let this one slip through. It's weird because according to Dan, I mean, let's just talk about the scene now. So Dan was going to have a show on the Sci-Fi Channel called Out There, and it was going to be like like a paranormal, quote unquote, investigative show, and I guess it was going to lean heavily on UFOs. And Dan tells a story during this documentary about how they were filming it, and I guess they like take a little break from filming, and he says that he saw like first, actually, he says the most unbelievable thing in this documentary, and I'll get to that in a second. He says like a car pulled up while he was on the cell phone. Give him a weird look. He looks away. He looks back, and the car vanished.
Oh, but
in an instant.
He said that a guy stepped out of the car who was like 9 foot tall or something, and gave him a dirty look. And then
did he say he was 9 feet tall? I thought he just said he was tall.
Yeah,
but yeah, he says that he gave him a look, and he thinks like that was the government. And then when he like went back inside, they were like, "By the way, we just got canceled."
And the funny thing about that, it's not really that funny, but I've heard him, like I used to listen to another paranormal podcast called Last Podcast on the Left. Have you ever heard of that one?
I've heard it. I've heard of it. Yeah, I've never heard it.
Yeah, I listened to it pretty diligently till I got bought up by Spotify, and then I'm like, I don't want the Spotify app. No thanks. By the way, Spotify, we're for sale if you want. Yeah, and he was on one of the episodes. Of course, they were talking about UFOs, and I swear, like every like third sentence or third answer to a question, he was constantly plugging that Crystal Skull vodka. Let's run the feature presentation bumper and get into Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs.
Welcome to your feature presentation.
All right, before we get too deep into the madness, to this conspiracy, if you will, I want to know what your thoughts, Yahel Velasquez, are on the paranormal. Do you believe in UFOs, ghosts, that sort of thing? And when is your earliest memory of being just sort of introduced to even the idea of aliens or the paranormal in general?
Yeah, I don't know if it's fair to like lump UFOs in the paranormal per se, because they're kind of their own thing. And I think there's life on another planet somewhere. Yeah, I think it's very likely. I don't see the universe is constantly stretching out, nearly infinite. Seems pretty unlikely that life wouldn't pop up somewhere else. Do I think we're being visited by aliens and UFOs? Very unlikely. And it's funny because like part of the stuff that Dan Akroyd talks about in this film about like, these aliens, they're like, he says they're either 1,000 or a billion years ahead of us in development, which is quite the range, quite the wiggle room he's given himself. But his point is like, imagine how much you could advance in 1,000,000 years as a civilization. Just look at how much we advance in air flight in 100 years.
Right. Okay.
The problem with that is that the universe, because it's constantly expanding, we're constantly getting further and further away from each like galaxies are constantly drifting further away from each other. Some will end up colliding as a result, but that's neither here nor there. But the point is, like, in 1,000,000 years, they would be so far away from us, they probably wouldn't even be able to tell where our galaxy is or that it exists. So it's just like highly unlikely.
Right.
What he's proposing here.
Yeah, listening to him talk is interesting because, like, I definitely believe that he believes it. At the same time, I feel like I feel like he's the type that likes to hear himself talk, and also, since he's a writer, he likes to sort of, maybe blow things a little out of proportion.
Yes.
So, I think, he has definitely sort of absorbed like the history, whether it's true or not, who knows, of, possible, UFOs, at least in terms of the planet Earth, like visiting and whatnot. And then he's kind of just sort of drawn his own kind of hypothesis and conclusion just from that. But yeah, it gives a wide range of explanations and possibilities of what could and couldn't be. And then by the end of the documentary, you're like, so what?
Yeah, he goes on a lot of weird tangents. And I was going to say that story about the car that pulls up, the funniest part of that story, and the most unbelievable part possibly in the entire documentary. Let me tell you, none of it's particularly believable. Right. Spoiler alert, is that he says that Britney Spears, when he stepped outside for break, Britney Spears called him on his cell phone directly to ask him to do a cameo on SNL because she was hosting that week. And the funny thing is, like, that's hilarious alone, but he talks about it like he and Britney talk all the time.
Yeah, it was.
He's like, Britney calls me up. I was just like, oh, hey, what's up? How's it going? And I'm like, yeah, sure, Britt, I'll go.
Yeah, that was so, all right. Not only did it destroy any credibility, if there was any, but it was also kind of sad. It was just like, I'm like, you're Dan Akroyd. You don't have to name drop to make yourself seem, still relevant in whatever year this came out.
Right.
Like,
you created the Blues Brothers and Ghostbusters. You're fine, buddy.
Right. I'd rather you not be hanging out with Britney Spears and have her number in your cell phone, which you probably don't.
Now, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Does this actually? It does nothing for Dan Akroyd. However, does this make you change your opinion of Britney Spears a little bit? Like, hey. Maybe she is a Dan Akroyd fan. Maybe she did call him. Maybe she has great taste in comedy.
It's possible. I think it's more, if that story is true, and I love that we're discussing this story and none of the UFO crap. If it's true, I think it's more of like, hey, I know what will definitely get people to watch my episode of Saturday Night Live if I have...
What'll get older people than my usual demographic.
Exactly. It's
if you're Britney,
if I have this classic, SNL member come on and introduce me, and it gives me cred, like in the process. But
well, I like to think that Britney and Dan Akroyd get together on the weekends,
shave each other's heads,
have a glass of wine. Yeah, baby, shave each other's heads while talking about Xenu from Scientology. Maybe have some Mai Tais.
I don't think Dan Akroyd is a Scientologist. Just
No. I don't think that at all.
But I'm sure he's probably fascinated by it, in probably the same way that we are. But back to the question, I think of whether UFOs are real or not. It's like, I definitely grew up in the 90s watching the X-Files, and before that, like Unsolved Mysteries. And
there were lots of like just random. I didn't even talk about like my first time seeing something about UFOs, but I just realized. But I'm kind of leaning the same way you are. TV, 90s TV, maybe. But weren't there like a bunch of like just random stories on shows like Inside Edition, like about UFOs all the time too?
Yeah. UFOs were hot in the 90s. They were so hot back then. Like, they were represented by William Morris. They could do no wrong. And I don't know.
In the 90s, you had UFOs and Yahoo Serious. Those were the two hot.
Yahoo Serious? Oh, man. I think you get the award for most obscure reference, at least for this episode. Maybe even for the year of 2023. They say in Russia,
you're the UFO.
I think you mean Australia, because that's where he's from. But now we're getting all over the place.
Oh, you're right. I confused Yahoo Serious with the
Yakov Smirnoff. Yeah,
Yakov Smirnoff.
Wow, that's some powerful stuff you got over there. So I wanted to see a UFO or have a paranormal experience, whether it be ghosts or aliens or Bigfoot or whatever, for the longest time, and then it pretty much never happened. And since I'm a big fan of facts and logic, I'm just to say that I'm an open-minded skeptic, I guess.
I'm kind of the same
40
way.
years on. I will say, and then you can tell me about your experience. I think we actually sort of briefly touched on these in a previous episode, possibly Baywatch Nights. I can't remember, but
gotta.
But the only time I saw something that looked very, very close to a UFO was the first time I worked Horror Nights out here at Universal Hollywood, which would be about, I don't know, almost 5 years ago at this point, maybe 6. And we were just out there working, and this thing flew by that looked pretty much like a UFO that you would see on Unsolved Mysteries. Maybe not round, more like, I don't know, like a line of light or something like that. And then, of course, like the next day in the newspaper, the local military base said that they were testing some sort of plane or something. But of course they would, Yahel. Of course they would. They don't want to admit they're in cahoots with the reptilians and and Alf and E.T. and and the Predators. They're of course they would say that.
Right.
Now, how about yourself?
Of course they would. Before I get to that, I do want to say hi to Smoke Monster, who's in the chat. He said, "My ties with Dan Akroyd sounds amazing," and it kind of does. Actually.
It does.
I would love to hang out with Dan Akroyd. Creative KV said, "I'm interested in the relationship between these sightings and with things such as mental health and sleep. That would actually be an interesting study." Yeah, I mean,
this would be a great time, and I forgot to load the trailer. If you like paranormal stuff, you might want to check out my paranormal audio drama podcast, Ray Can't Sleep.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'll plug it later at the end of the show. But anyway, continue.
Anyways, yeah, I mean, I saw the last time I visited Puerto Rico, which was in 1998. I saw like something weird at night, like in the sky that, went by real fast, and they had some strange lights that came down to the ground. And that was about the closest thing. But I mean, I'm a pretty skeptical person too. I also like facts. I obviously, like, I would keep an open mind, but I need to see hard evidence. Something that Dan Akroyd almost kind of complains about towards the end. He's talking. He's asked one of a series of stupid questions by the host, and
very uncharismatically, by the way.
Yeah. The host thinks that. Wait, where is it at? I had written something about the host.
David
lack of charisma.
Serrata.
He has the charisma of a wet paper towel.
Yeah,
basically.
David Serrata, I think is what it is.
Yeah, he's also the director
and editor and producer.
And I believe he chose the 30 fonts used in this
He
video.
was also the janitor and craft services for this, probably.
And I'll put a link to the documentary in the chat here in just a moment. But what was I even talking? What was I answering? Steve? Oh yeah. So I remember now. So Dan Akroyd tells a story towards the end where he's asked about, like, what do people think when you talk to them about this? And he mentions that Harold Ramis, who he worked with on Ghostbusters, I think he was the co-writer, right? He plays Egon. How he's like, oh, he's a skeptic.
He needs facts.
He doesn't. Yeah, he said he doesn't believe in UFOs. He says he needs hard, tangible proof. He says he needs evidence, and I'm just open to believe it.
I mean, that's how religions are formed.
Yes.
Oh man. But did you have anything else more to add about what it is or what you thought you might have seen in Puerto Rico?
Oh, I mean, I just assumed it was, some kind of
the old U.S. military.
Maybe a plane with a different light that I hadn't seen before, or maybe a helicopter. I definitely, I would jump, like to me, like UFO being the answer to anything you see in the sky is the most complicated answer possible.
Right. But it's the most interesting.
I forgot the name of the. Sure, I forgot the name of the theory or whatever, or the same, but it's like usually the correct answer is the simplest.
Oh, Occam's razor,
because it's the most likely to be possible. Occam's razor. Thank you. So I'm a big I don't want to say believer in that, but supporter of that.
Supporter of Occam's razor, as am I. Well, I think that. But were you a fan of was the first time you were introduced to the idea of like the paranormal? Like, was that on like a TV show or something? Perhaps.
Honestly, it was probably at church.
What?
Because
right.
Yeah,
I guess
because my parents raised me. They tried brainwashing.
Yeah, but
me,
they don't.
but
they don't count that as like the paranormal because that's what they believe to be true. I mean, speaking for my parents as well.
That's not necessary. I mean, I can only speak for Spanish language. No, because I've been to English speaking churches that do this too. So a lot of times they'll refer to God's powers and abilities and Jesus as supernatural.
Oh, yeah, I guess I've heard that occasionally.
And they believe in things like demons, obviously, that they can influence people. And I've been at church where some preacher is saying a sermon that that wasn't a ghost. They'll retell some story or whatever. I'll be like, oh, that wasn't a ghost, that was a demon.
Right. It's weird. I get in the church that I was raised, I kind of get the idea that the more fantastical elements of the Bible, they kind of don't really believe in that much. And they almost have almost like scientific explanations. They're like, oh, of course evolution is real, but it was God who evolved them.
God, I read it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, we probably shouldn't get too deep into religion, or we'll.
I mean, how dare we actually become controversial and get more listeners? But
yeah. I think people by now that do listen have figured out, like, you and I are both atheists.
Yeah, well,
like,
we've blatantly stated that on past episodes, but anyone's welcome to listen. We don't discriminate.
As Creative KV, the great comment here. They wrote, pick and choose religion buffet. Yeah, that's what a lot of it is. And, once science kind of makes clear that something is not possible, they're like, oh, no, that's a parable. That story is
Or even worse, they're just like, oh, these facts, this is just the work of Satan.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, did you see that they found a full dinosaur pretty recently, pretty much, like with skin and all?
What?
And
No.
I just can't believe we Satanists put it there using George Soros's money.
Oh, that's awesome. Are you ready to jump into the facts about this documentary here?
Yeah.
And I use the term loosely. All right, so okay, man. Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs premiered at this sounds so prestigious, the Cambridge Film Festival, July 15th, 2005. I bet it just rocked that film festival and took home all the awards. I mean, there's not a lot of information about this documentary, period.
It's the government trying to keep it secret, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, you think those Hollywood elites are gonna let in, the facts about aliens? No way, man. So, in your own words, tell me what Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs is about.
So, this guy David Sereda, who's the director / host of this. It's just basically him and Dan Akroyd sitting across from each other talking about UFOs, mostly Dan Akroyd talking about it. And they use the most extreme close-ups I've ever seen, where sometimes literally 1/3 of Dan Akroyd's face will take up 100% of your screen. Did you notice in some of the close-ups that Dan Akroyd has a bunch of glitter on the left side of his face?
I thought that was sweat.
No, it's glitter. I rewound it many times. It is glitter, Steve. Dan Akroyd came to this right after a strip club
or Mardi Gras, yeah. It's I'm really enjoying this Mardi Gras, but I have to go talk about UFOs. Here's the IMDb. That was pretty good. Here's the IMDb synopsis. I'd say it's even more boring than yours, and that is a UFO enthusiast interviews Dan Akroyd on the subject of extraterrestrials visiting Earth. And as we said, this is directed, edited, and produced by David Sereda. And aside from this documentary, which was his last, he also produced...
I got him, Steve.
You got him, man. Got him. He's in Gitmo, man, being tortured. He also produced Evidence, the case of NASA's UFOs, and quantum communications.
I don't think David Sereda has ever produced evidence of anything.
The only thing
except his inability to edit.
Or even come up with a decent title that's, less than 5 words. Although quantum communications is only 2 words. But
I'm going to put up the link, guys, in the chat in just a moment. I'm actually looking it up right now. I forgot to. I'll put it there.
But yeah, he needs to learn how to title a documentary. Anyway, we already talked about Dan Akroyd and all the stuff that he was in. I mean, these days, he just seems to pop up on whoever will allow him to pimp his Crystal Skull vodka, which I would love for us to try someday on camera. I think that would be, but I think it's really expensive from what I hear. Jay and Mike actually have one on Red Letter Media. They have.
I can't remember if it's really expensive or not. I don't think it's super expensive, but I've heard that it's like a pretty mid, like not really great vodka.
And would you believe he has a ridiculous story to go along why it's in a crystal skull?
Yeah, because he believes in the alien, like basically in the Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull thing.
Right.
That's why.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, that's...
By the way, and I have just, sorry to cut you off,
okay.
but I just put a link in the chat where you can watch the full hour and 22-minute documentary on YouTube for the low price of a few brain cells.
And precious time.
Yeah. I mean, were you like entertained while you were watching? Well, I guess we'll get to that at the end.
Well, I mean, we're basically at the, where we would normally talk about the walkthrough. And I mean, I'll just say my thoughts at the beginning here. And I mean, I was excited to get into it. I think I was kind of hoping for stuff that was a little more off the wall than what we got. Like, basically... For the most part, this documentary is pretty bare bones. Let me ask you this. How many cameramen would you say worked on this?
One? No, I mean, I don't think there were any maybe one cameraman.
According to IMDb, they had 3.
Like, what were the other 2 doing? Like maybe a little Eiffel Tower situation, running a little train on them?
I mean, I was just thinking that they would hire one, and then that guy would get so bored he would leave, and then they would get another guy in there. He'd stay for like the middle part, and he would hand the camera off to someone else.
Possibly. And I don't know. I don't even think it's fair to call this a documentary because, I mean, I know that that's what it's labeled at and that's what it's categorized at. Mm-hmm. However, it's not really a documentary because they document very little. Mm-hmm. It's mostly Dan Akroyd talking about his thoughts and his theories on UFOs. And I will say there's several times where like Dan Akroyd says, oh, this is what I think. He's not trying to
sell it as
everything
gospel.
Off here.
Yeah.
Right. The one thing he is selling as gospel is that UFOs are here. He does several times and you think it's going to end because he goes on this, it's time for us to accept that UFOs, they're here. They're real. So-and-so said it. This general said it. This fry cook said it. This president said it.
Right. So it's an interview, and then they've intercut footage from, I guess, various, mostly past military and ufologists personnel talking about UFOs, and they have... I think what it really I mean, it's obvious that this is super low budget, and this was early 2000s, so
2012, I think, 2005, excuse me.
Right, so they don't have, we have access to awesome, like relatively cheap cameras, and then we can just go on, YouTube and download whatever footage we want and throw in there, and back then that wasn't as relatively easy to access. So, what do you? I'm like trying to think what this was shot on. Maybe like a Canon XL1 or something. But like the lighting is like so poor that I feel like the big problem. You mentioned earlier the fonts. Like that's one of the things that makes this thing look so cheap.
So amateurish. Like anytime there's a title on screen or lower third or any text, it's almost always a different font than you last saw. And the transitions to go into them are like I hate to call them motion graphics.
Yeah, like little jumbly letters and stuff. Like
oh, here are the letters dropping in, or like weird fade-ins for the letters. Like they're all like the kind of stuff that I'm pretty sure this was edited with Final Cut.
Right, early, Final Cut.
Like mid-2000s Final Cut, because some of these were, a few of them I definitely recognize as stock text transitions from when I had Final Cut Pro on my Mac in the mid-2000s.
Right. And then there's also, they throw in like sound effects every now and then. And it really just, it comes off as cheap and cheesy. And
And you know what's weird? So they show all this footage, like you were talking about. They do show footage of people being interviewed. They didn't interview them. It's just like, stock footage they got from somewhere. But like they don't really like the footage that they're showing you of UFOs, whether it be footage made by NASA or home video footage or military footage. And most of it's like NASA and military footage, which I'm sure they chose to like try and add credibility.
Mm-hmm.
It rarely has anything to do with what they're talking about.
Right.
Which is so weird. They'll be like talking about like, oh yeah, this is how I think, I think there's 21 different dimensions is one of the things like Dan Akroyd goes on about there being different dimensions.
He just picked a random number.
Yeah. And to be fair, that is something that in cosmology is accepted now. Like if you read, I think, like I'm really into like physics and physics books. And if you read like Michio Kaku's, oh my God, what's it called? Future of Tomorrow or something like that. Or Physics of Tomorrow, or any of his other books, like he talks about that. A lot of these theorems have been mathematically proven. So there probably are multiple dimensions, but Dan Akroyd is here in 2005, clearly just talking out of his asshole.
Yeah. And that was, I was kind of hoping for maybe something a little more fantastic. But obviously this was a low budget, and I don't know. I will say one of the sort of the highlights is, do you remember when they had the stock footage from, I guess he's a former astronaut, Gordon Cooper? Do you remember that guy?
The guy that sounds like he's 10 breaths away from death?
Yeah, well, that, and he also sounds like, I don't know, he came from Andy Griffith or something.
Yeah, it sounds like one of his parents was a Cracker Barrel.
Yeah.
His accent is so like iconic. He has like a real Southern drawl combined with
He's like
being like an older gentleman.
Like,
and
I
mean, he's an astronaut. I'm sure he's a smart guy.
Like,
obviously,
aliens. I don't have a problem with aliens. It's women voting. That's what I have a problem with. No offense to Gordon Cooper. We're just having fun here. But
Steve, I don't think he's going to hear this.
He's probably long gone.
Else.
The aliens took him a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, who knows? There could be some Gordon Cooper fans out there. Shout it out in the live chat. But I mean, yeah, like anytime he's on camera, it's just like, time for a nap. And speaking of other people who are also nap-inducing,
I feel like even though he's being interviewed like in a hotel room or something like that, like the camera's gonna pan out. There's gonna be somebody behind him churning butter, or something very old time. He's gonna be going on behind. Like his stuff they should have put a sepia filter on.
Just black and white, straight up black and white. Other sort of memories that this kind of drudged up for me, and this is kind of off topic. We're just like, I feel like around this era, this was sort of like I don't know, I wouldn't say birth, but like a lot of kind of like, really sort of counterculture documentaries were becoming like popular. I mean, they were showing up on, I guess, early YouTube. This might even be before that. But like, do you remember like when Zeitgeist came out? Do you remember that?
I was just going to say Zeitgeist. That was on Netflix, actually.
Recently, or when it first came?
No, way back in the day, like 2012, like early streaming Netflix.
Right.
Like 2004, because I remember watching that at the mother-in-law suite I lived in. So like 2014, something like that.
Mm-hmm. And
maybe 2013.
And those. And then I remember there were other ones. There was one against Walmart that came out for a while that I'm pretty sure was sold at Walmart. Who killed the electric car? Do you remember that one? Did you ever see that one?
Oh, yeah.
And I remember when you and I went and watched Religulous in the theater.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. Too bad Bill Maher is kind of, oh man, he's Bill Maher.
Yeah.
And
just says
he's getting more Bill Maher-ish every year.
But the thing with this one is that it's all right. So it's not sensational enough to be like, you can't like drop a bunch of acid and go, whoa, Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs. And at the same time, it's not bare bones enough to present itself as like some sort of actual factual documentation.
Right.
So it's just sort of stuck in the middle, and it kind of ends up being a little bit of a slog at times.
And Dan Akroyd is, he doesn't crack a single joke.
Nope.
You might expect that he might have like used some of his comedic talents to kind of make things flow better. He's very serious the whole time. He's always giving these like deep, pensive looks, often while smoking a cigarette.
Oh, I was about to say, man, when they were showing up with that cigarette, I mean, thinking he's like Edward R. Murrow or something.
Oh, Steve, did you hear what the host thinks about him, about Dan? He says it in the beginning. So at the very beginning of this documentary, David Sereda, while talking about setting up the documentary, that how I'm going to talk to Dan Akroyd, yada yada, while describing Dan Akroyd and his thoughts on UFOs and his level of intelligence, he says that of Dan Akroyd, it's like Einstein is hiding inside of a comic genius.
Right. Well, I think it's actually been proven that Dan Akroyd is a pretty smart guy. He's actually got, like, I don't know, some sort of ridiculous IQ or something. But yeah, it's clear that David Sereda doesn't make it a secret that he's a big mark for Dan Akroyd. Yeah. And I mean,
and I've always heard that Dan Akroyd's a super, super smart guy too. And honestly, outside of this, any other time I've seen him talking about any other, like non-comedic subjects or whatever, he's well informed, really smart guy. Unfortunately, he probably, because of that, and he knows that he's intelligent, he probably has a little bit of that Dunning-Kruger effect going, where he's like, oh, well, I believe in UFOs, so it must be true, kind of a thing,
Maybe. Yeah, I could see that. But I was going to ask you...
Because a lot of times he says, like, something, he'll state something like, well, it has to be UFOs because there can't be anything else, and that's just the next law. It's just logical. Like, that's his argument for a lot of things, and the host as well. But then he gives like no explanation as to why it's logical. He's just like, "Hey, I'm smart. I figured like this makes sense." So it's what it is.
Well, I mean,
Dan, if you're listening, though, I do love you.
Yeah, we love you very much.
Call me like I'm Brittany.
We don't want to get on his bad side, not like with that Rob Liefeld. Yeah, I was going to ask you, all right, so when a celebrity comes out and starts talking about the paranormal in the way that Dan Akroyd does, and I mean, I wouldn't say that Dan is an exact sort of parallel to, but are you familiar with David Icke at all? I couldn't hear you say no, but... Did you?
Sorry, I was muted because I'm using this mechanical keyboard and I was looking something up.
No problem. But so David Icke, I think he was also a comedian as well, or a British TV personality, and he's the big reptilian guy. Like, he's done multiple like books and documentaries all about the reptilians, how the royal family are actually reptilians and stuff. And
oh well, yeah, naturally.
And yeah, I mean. Do you think that when people who are well off, who celebrities who have like a shit ton of money, and it doesn't really affect them to like go out monetarily to go out and talk about the paranormal, when they come out and talk about it, do you think that reinforces it, or I don't know, what do you think that does for the argument? Does it do anything?
I don't think it does anything, but it's so funny because, so Smoke Monster was just saying that in the chat that he had made a comment earlier about Smashing Pumpkins that I missed, but he says, speaking of Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan is into the reptilian thing too. Yeah, Billy Corgan is into a lot of things, and very few of those things involve facts, unfortunately. He's a big Q guy, apparently.
QAnon?
And I don't mean Q from Star Trek. Yeah, amongst other things. But anyways, I do think it's funny though that like this documentary, kind of going back to what you were saying, like, hey, how does a celebrity talking about this make me feel about it? It doesn't make me like lend any more credence to it. If a bunch of scientific experts, like actual real scientists, not just like the random one or two that you're gonna get,
or can afford,
it's real or whatever. Yeah. Like the scientific community as a whole was like, yeah, this is accepted thing. Here's the study. Here's the peer-reviewed papers. Okay, fine. I'd be happy to believe that aliens were visiting us. Great, take me off of here. Take me with you. But anyways, at the very end of the documentary, when the credits start to roll, the very first thing in the credits is starring Dan Akroyd in honor of his courage for bringing the UFO issue into full public disclosure. What?
Yep.
So
I mean, he was the only one.
I'm assuming for you, celebrities talking about it doesn't do anything either, right?
Yeah. But all right. So recently, didn't they release like by they I mean like the military? They released like a bunch of papers that pretty much confirms that the UFOs are basically real. Did you hear about that?
Well, the whole thing is like a UFO doesn't mean it's an
Right.
alien. It's an unidentified flying object. It could be anything. It could be, some, I don't know, like it could be something like the Northern Lights, where it's just like this weird
Aurora Borealis
climate
at
thing.
this time of year.
Yeah.
Localized entirely within your kitchen. Sorry.
But I think something was released like a year or two ago, something like that. But nothing came of it. And Steve, have you noticed how ever since cameras, got improved, and everyone now has an HD camera in their pocket, that there's less and less UFO sightings? Shouldn't there be more? Everyone has a camera, and it shoots in much higher quality than the stuff in the 80s and 90s. Why is that? There's no clear Bigfoot footage either. What's going on,
Conversely,
Steve?
there is tons of ghost footage on TikTok. They're like, look, this guy went into a graveyard, and then he like pans the camera over, and then there's somebody looking at him from like on the other side of the gravestone, and then they go over there, and he's not there. It's almost as if they staged it. Yahel, do you think they staged it?
Yeah, I think they might have. But yeah, it's funny how that works. Like basically, a lot of the 80s and 90s and early to mid 2000s footage of paranormal stuff comes down to people not understanding how cameras work.
Right. Yeah.
They don't understand shutter speeds. They don't understand camera sensors and lenses. They don't understand how changing, something from one frame rate to another might affect something with interpolation. And, that's basically it. And I looked up some of the footage that they show on here. Not all of it, but like almost everything I looked up as far as like their, look at this proof with this alien home camera footage, or look at this from NASA, has already been well debunked a long time ago, sometimes even before 2005. Right. Like they show a lot of footage like Smoke Monster said in the chat, aperture effects. Creative KV said, don't get clickbait ideas, guys. Oh, I think he's referring to the paranormal thumbnails on YouTube for those kind of channels.
Well, we are reptilian media, and already people who are don't realize that we're like a comedy channel. Like I've already started following us. So whatever, we'll take it.
But like, they show a lot of footage of space shuttle footage, where there's a camera looking towards the back end of the space shuttle, while it's in orbit, and, a disc will fly by or whatever. They'll be like, oh, see, and it's like, well, it's not that it's whatever was on camera, which is probably like dust or, there's a lot of space trash and debris even in, 20 years ago. When you're in orbit and you're in a space shuttle, the space shuttle is moving around 17,000 miles an hour. Yeah, stuff that pops up on camera is going to look like it's moving fast because the space shuttle is going 17,000 miles an hour, And so from, your perspective of the camera, it looks like something moved, but it didn't move.
Right.
You moved.
Well, one thing that I love is, ghosts. Where, I mean, why can't you ever see a ghost in like the middle of the day on a beach? It's always got to be, in a darkened, fog smoked, whatever, woods or graveyard or something.
Well, Steve, if there's one thing I know about the afterlife, it's that ghosts hate getting sand stuck in their ectoplasm.
Well, they they don't want to pay to park. The prices are just over the top. They don't want to get sunburned. Like, Yeah,
they don't want to spend their ghost bucks on parking.
That's another thing that, I can't. All right, I don't know for sure, but I don't know if you've ever heard that. Along with the creation of the Ghostbusters script, Dan Akroyd, he actually went ahead and wrote out all the back science to how ghosts work in the Ghostbusters universe. Did you ever hear that?
No, I didn't. That's very Star Trek.
And also, like, the original script for the Ghostbusters was like, way huge and took everything way serious. And I think it was Harold Ramis once again. Too bad he's passed on to Ghostland, but
yeah. Why did Dan Akroyd have to be the one that lived?
Yeah,
right?
well, they were like, oh, what a great script, Dan, and they cut it up, and it became the Ghostbusters that we know today. But yeah, no, actually, I do know for a fact that he does believe in ghosts, because someone asked him, they were like, what are you gonna tell your kids when they ask you if ghosts are real? And he's like, I'm gonna tell them there might be something hiding under their bed. And but not to fear it, to find it interesting, to like interview it, or some ridiculous thing that you probably shouldn't tell your kids.
This is like what Dan Akroyd said.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, because like he talks about wanting to have like a summit with leaders from the alien planets.
Right. Well, I mean, the UFO community is like, I mean, I would say it's no joke, but it's no joke. I mean, the term ufologist is real, and I think they do have like meetings and stuff, almost like.
Oh yeah. No, they have lots of big conferences and conventions. And Creative KV wrote in the chat here, I'm assuming talking of Dan Akroyd, didn't his family pass on these beliefs to him? I forgot where I read this. I don't know where Akroyd got those ideas from. To be honest.
I know he said that the big thing that I guess sort of inspired him, at least with UFOs, was I guess there was it was a magazine, like a picture on Time Life, because apparently there was
yeah, he does talk about it. You're right. Yeah, he talks about seeing in a magazine some artwork and
it was supposedly a picture
stories
of a UFO that appeared over Washington D.C. at the time. And
okay.
I guess he was like, what is that? And they couldn't really explain it to him. And that sort of just led him down the rabbit hole of...
That's what it was. His parent, you're right. He said like his parents were like, I don't know. There's something weird there though. Like, but he doesn't say that like his parents said, yeah, that's an alien.
Right.
They made the mistake of being honest with their son.
Right. My parents told me that it was all quackery. They were like, nope, there's no chance that aliens could be real, son. Now go to school. That's what they said.
But maybe Creative KV's right. Maybe like in other interviews, he's Dan's kind of expounded on that and said it's more explicitly that they were like, yeah, we think it could be or whatever. But he then right after that, Dan Akroyd also talks about how watching films like The Earth Stood Still and those early science fiction films also influenced him.
See, and that's when you throw in like works of fiction into your nonfiction documentary. I think it, I don't know. I think it takes away whatever credibility you might have had.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree, and I say that as a science fiction fan, obviously, and big Star Trek fan. Fortunately, actually, no one from Star Trek, I'm happy to say, worked on this.
That would be so sad. I don't know. You have LeVar
Executive
Burton.
Producer Gene Roddenberry.
Oh man, what? J.J. Abrams was the intern.
Yeah, I did make a few notes, Steve, about some stuff from the documentary that stuck out to me, and I don't want to forget to mention stuff. So I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, go through it real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Wait, Creative KV wrote in the chat here. I think I'm referring to the beliefs in quotes area in the personal life section of his Wikipedia page. Oh, well. Creative KV, you've done more research than we did already. Maybe you should be doing the show, actually.
I think you just applied to be Obscurity Now research team member number 1. You'll get your membership package in your email coming up.
Yes. But around the 10-minute mark is when we see the glitter on Dan's face for the first time. I felt it important to make a note about that.
I thought it was sweat, really, just for the record.
No, because it changes colors, which, I mean, and usually there's not enough water or liquid in sweat to get that. And you have to think about like the age of the camera and the quality of the camera it's in. It can't be like it catching the light refracting. Anyways, I've done more video analysis just now than Dan Akroyd and the host of this ever have on any
it wasn't Dan Akroyd's job. It was David Serrata's job, though.
So anyways, really, I had written a note that about 15 minutes in, it's really just been Dan Akroyd's theories and no real attempt to show evidence so far. And I wrote that because I didn't remember how this goes despite watching it, like 10 years ago or something.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote that assuming it was coming. The attempts at showing evidence was coming, or at least being like, hey, this is, steps 1 through 3 of, why we think this is real.
Mm-hmm.
It never comes. It's always just Dan's theories and a couple times the host's theories.
Right. Yeah. It's I mean that leads me to my final question, but I'll save that to when you're done with your notes.
What did you think about the host? Because at one point, actually at several points, they talk about like basically they're talking about faster than light travel and like using fuel. What kind of fuel would aliens use? And that was probably to me the most interesting part actually when Dan Akroyd starts saying, well, what these aliens must be using some kind of technology we don't have to either travel between dimensions. That's Dan Akroyd's other thing. He's basically saying, without explicitly saying, that like maybe some of these aliens aren't traveling faster than light. They could be in another dimension that's on top of ours or occupying some space.
That's a popular theory. Yeah.
And he's like, oh, maybe that's what we're seeing here. But then he talks about like, what are they using as fuel, for whatever system they have? Do they have to get rid of that fuel? Do they have the same problems we have, in a way? So I actually thought like that was kind of like a little interesting rabbit hole I've never heard in the alien discussion. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a interesting way of, I think he just keeps digging basically and just keeps asking questions, but there are no answers.
But he thinks that these questions have been answered.
Right. And yeah, that's that's what makes this a non-documentary, is that just there's no cold hard facts basically.
Yeah. Even the people that are, that they show interview footage of, it's just what they think they saw for the most part. Every once in a while, you'll get like a general or that astronaut guy that'll be like, oh, and they couldn't explain this. Okay, well, if they couldn't explain it, that means you have no explanation.
Right.
Is what you're saying. Which is that's why I hate when people are like, there's no explanation for this. It must be a ghost. It must be a UFO. I'm like, well, if you don't have an explanation, then you don't know that it is a ghost or you know what I'm saying? Like you just
I agree.
Anyways.
Yeah.
But what I was getting to is, what did you think when they were discussing propulsion and stuff about the host's idea for how to travel interstellarly faster than light?
What was his idea? Refresh my memory.
So I'll tell you, his idea, and it is his idea. At first he talks about it as though it's a theory that's out there, and by the end of his story he's like, this is just something I've come up with and this is the inception of it, as though he's gonna go and like do scientific studies on it. He talks about taking matter, like you, me, the ship we're gonna be in, to travel somewhere else, and altering its mass so that it weighs, he said, weighs as much as a photon. A photon doesn't have mass. A photon, like light. So he already is using like the wrong like nomenclature, and I'm not even like a fucking physicist, and I know this, but yeah. So he says, take our mass away, make us have no mass. Basically, is what he's saying, even though he doesn't realize that's what he's saying. And then you could, use anything like photons to push us forward, or use like a light sail, which is like a real method that you could use of travel where photons are pushing you forward, but you have mass.
Yeah, I vaguely remember this. It's so weird because, like, okay, I mean, the point of this documentary is to get Dan Akroyd's thoughts. I mean, it's kind of narcissistic to throw your own stuff in there because we don't care about David Sereda. We're here for Dan Akroyd.
Well, you're 100% right. But in all fairness to David Sereda, he does throw some questions, some what-if scenarios at Dan Akroyd. What did you think about his various what-if scenarios?
I love it how it's usually like 3 to 6 questions all bundled together.
Yes, why? It's like, it's not just like, it's like there's one scenario where you think the scenario is going to be like, Dan, would you ever go into space given the option? And that's how it's like, Dan, given the chance, would you go into space? And if in space you saw something you weren't supposed to see or something we've never seen before, like an actual alien, but before you went and agreed to go into space, you were required to sign an NDA with the military that you wouldn't disclose anything, but you did see something, Dan. So would you Actually tell humanity the truth and go back on your word to the government, Dan. And then Dan's answer is like a sentence.
Right. Yeah. Like, I would say that I almost feel, again, I don't know why they had 3 cameramen. I feel like they probably had 1 camera. They went ahead and filmed all of Dan Akroyd, and then after he left, then David Sereda filmed his questions, and they intercutted it in later. But yeah,
Do you think any of Dan Akroyd's interview was cut out, or that they used 100% of it?
I mean, I feel like there's a strong possibility that there is. I mean, it's hard to say. Like, again, I couldn't find like any sort of BTS about this. Like, I was hoping to find like maybe in the trivia section, oh, we talked for 4 hours and had to edit it down to 1 hour and 20 minutes. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's always something that was found on the, that ended up on the cutting room floor. I mean, there's times where you can see, Dan trying to come up with an answer, and, he like and a bit there. I mean, but
But see, stuff like that makes me think that they used most, if not like all, of the footage outside of maybe, him coughing.
I mean, I can only imagine that David did not pay Dan for this. That maybe.
Oh, I think Dan was all too eager to talk about it, because David at the beginning talks about how like I can't remember where they
met at some party or something.
They're friends.
But at the same time, I'm sure he's like, okay, you got 1 hour and 20 minutes there. Let's do this thing.
Yeah, I think he sat with him for an hour, and that's where like Dan was like, oh shit, I better find some footage of other people talking.
Right. So what you're proposing is that it's probably like a 30 to 45 minute interview that they then had to edit in a bunch of clips in order to make it feature length.
I think so. And one of the things that make me think that Dan Akroyd, they use almost everything, is that because of a question David asks him, he ends up having to defend not killing Hitler.
Right. Oh, man.
So basically, Dan goes to put one of his what-if scenarios to Dan Akroyd. And he's like, what if you got aliens came down and said, hey, you can come with us to another dimension, Dan, but you have to leave right now. Would you do it? And this is where the question goes like lopsided into like 5 different things. And if you went with them and you found out that they can also travel through time and they can put you in any point in time, would you do that? And if you
move it along, David, move it along.
Would you choose to change events in history? And would you also, besides changing those events in the past, choose to go into the future as well? Like, what is this question?
And then he says, no, I don't want to alter the time stream, basically. He said
he gives the Star Trek answer for like why in Star Trek, whenever there's a time travel storyline, they go in the past, they try to not do anything, basically. Right. Lay as low as possible, because they don't want to alter the timeline. They might accidentally erase people from history, doing anything, yada, yada. And that's kind of Dan's answer. He's like, but the way Dan goes into it, because he wasn't expecting such a stupid question, I guess. Like Dan goes into it talking about like, oh, well, yeah, I would go on a trip, but no, in the past, I would go and observe. I would watch, but I wouldn't change anything. You can't do that, because if you change something, you might change our, like, sure, you might be tempted to go back and drown Hitler as a 15-year-old boy, prevent the Holocaust. But you can't do that. You can't do that because, we don't have the suffering. We don't have the rights that we've given people. We've learned from those mistakes. And I mean, sure, yeah, you want to kill Hitler. But even if you kill him, it would have been another guy. And he mentioned some other
German guy. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so funny because like then Dan has to give this mini history lesson about like the people that were like working with the Nazi party to like explain why he wouldn't go back and kill Hitler.
Right.
And because they don't cut that out, Steve, Dan Akroyd saying he wouldn't kill Hitler, and then him defending it, I'm like, oh, okay, they must have had to like use as much of the interview as
Can you imagine that clip out of context? Like, we should just throw it up on Twitter. It's like, no, I wouldn't kill Hitler, and then next up, Gawker.
It should just be like us, like being Dan Akroyd. Would you go back in time and kill Hitler? No, I wouldn't kill Hitler.
Yeah, then on the next day,
TikTok.
Dan Akroyd is touted as being canceled. Yeah.
Yeah. More like the next day, a mysterious 9-foot-tall figure holding an empty bottle of crystal
Skull vodka. Yeah.
Crystal Skull vodka comes and bashes our brains in with it. now you're the skull.
Right. And then makes us into one of the bottles. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Did you notice that the host? I mean, I think we've already kind of touched on it, but he has no understanding of how science works.
Not only that, but like basic production and interview skills.
Well, yeah, that too. Did you notice that he doesn't know how literally doing the Juggalo, the Insane Clown Posse, he does not understand how magnets work.
What? Give me an example.
So early in the documentary, maybe like 20 minutes in, he makes a big deal about like they start talking about like different technologies that could be like being developed and like implying that we're getting this technology maybe from UFO we've captured or whatever. Have you noticed that they're very vague too on like what they mean? Like it's so weird.
Big surprise.
Yeah. Anyways, there's like a lot of context missing to what they talk about.
Yeah.
But he shows footage and talks about like a 75-foot metal ball cannon being lifted into the air, kind of floating in the air. And he's talking about like these testicles being used to create a field, yada, yada. Basically, he calls it anti-gravity technology, but it's just a magnetic field. It's just magnets, bro. How do they work? That's this guy. That is David Sereda. Like, he's like amazed and blown away that you can lift a 75-pound ball with a quote-unquote anti-gravity field, which is just a magnetic force. This guy doesn't understand how anything works.
I mean,
that's like basic 6th grade science.
Didn't he watch the ending of The Brave Little Toaster? I mean, come on, man. When they're in the junkyard?
Barely not.
See, and
then they also talk about... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's why he shouldn't have put himself in this documentary. But if we're going off the theory that they didn't have enough footage to actually, make it a feature-length documentary, then I understand why he put himself in there.
But I mean, is it any worse, like what he said about like the technology stuff than like some of the stuff Dan Akroyd says? At one point, Dan Akroyd, it might be in the same segment talking about technology. He starts talking about like particle beams and all kinds of beams. Then he says a disabling beam, like talking about like how we may have this, but because we just don't use it in wars because we already have like air and military superiority. So why would we like kind of like show our hand that we have this super technology?
Oh yeah, that was ridiculous.
But the best thing, so he's like, a particle beam we may have, you might see that in the future, or a disabling beam. The fuck is a disabling beam?
That sounds like one of the robots from like Mega Man, Disabling Man. Like,
well, yeah, it does. So after he just makes you handicapped,
yeah,
that's what Disabling Man does. You end up in a wheelchair. But after talking about particle beams, disabling beams, then he says immediately, I mean, of course, we've seen no evidence of this.
Yeah.
Right. Well, talking about a Dan Akroyd.
Yeah. Well, that's like that's the old. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can sort of bulletproof your argument or whatever it is you're talking about. It's like the guy who rags on insults other people, but then immediately like rags on himself, or like the artist who is insecure about their work and puts it out and they insult it before they get a chance for anyone else to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, but when I hear Dan Akroyd talk, like, I hear like an improviser, like someone who was in improv groups their entire life, and they're just yes-anding all these ridiculous questions.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, well, what can I throw out that sounds sciencey? Ooh, a particle beam. Ooh, a disabling beam. Like, but then
because there's several times that you can tell he's just kind of going on a mental tangent, kind of answering as he's thinking through it. And to his credit, I will say a lot of times at the end of those, he'll say, but that's just what I think.
Allegedly, yeah. You got to throw in that allegedly. That's what you got to do. That way you can always keep yourself from being sued. Yeah.
But again, he does end the documentary with, General so-and-so, astronaut so-and-so said that aliens exist. The Mexican government said that this is a UFO.
If you can't trust the Mexican government, who can you trust?
Yeah. So he's like, we need to get to the point. He insists that we whoever we is, I guess we as a civilization, the media maybe, have arrived at a point where we just we accept that they're here, that they're real, and now we got to figure out how to best use this information.
That's a good Dan Akroyd. I like it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, David, can you get a little bit closer?
David,
on my face.
Get me the drugs.
David, more clear.
Yeah,
more clear.
Put that camera right in my face, right in there, and now jiggle it and put it down here and shoot it up my nose. Yeah. I wanted to bring up. It keeps flashing up here on the Obscuritron, the cover of the DVD.
Yes.
How
I wanted to ask you about this too.
One extreme close up of Dan Akroyd's face is not enough. Like they have to have 3 for some reason. And I love it how in the credits at the bottom, and there it is. So it's Dan Akroyd's name here, and then David Sereda, and then they even put the Gordon Cooper guy down there, and it's just I don't know. I think it's pretty lame design. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And Gordon Cooper, for those that weren't listening before or don't remember, he's one of the astronauts that is
stock footage
featured. There's an archived interview of him in this. It's not like he was like, yes, I want to be in your Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs documentary, David Sereda. They just use archived footage, but yet he's billed here. It's like if you and I put out a documentary about Brad Pitt and we're like, oh, starring Stephen Honeycutt, Yahel Velasquez, and Brad Pitt.
Right. Yeah, well, isn't this what I mean? This is just David Sereda's last ditch effort to elevate his career by attaching himself to Dan Akroyd, and that leads me to my final question. Unless you have more, is all right. So there's no facts here. What is the point of this documentary? What do you think the point is?
I don't know. I guess you could say that based on the very the credits where it says, Dan Akroyd in his honor for bringing UFO discourse into full public disclosure or whatever, that maybe the point is just to create awareness and conversation about UFOs, to reignite, people's attention to it, because by the mid 2000s, it wasn't like it was in the 90s,
Right. That's true. Yeah.
So maybe, but as far as a traditional documentary, I don't know what the point of it would be other than to hope people talk about UFOs.
As you're pretty much a documentarian yourself. Is this a complete insult to documentaries everywhere?
This is, it is not. It's edited very poorly. It doesn't flow. They jump back and forth, even though they have segments in this where it'll be the technology, and they'll have
they tried to divide
title.
it up to make it make sense, but it's a conversation with just random clips thrown in and bad fonts and transitions.
Right, and a section about UFO technology, that's the title of the section, and they'll talk about UFO technology maybe the first for a minute, but then they'll jump to something that they were already talking about earlier,
Right.
So it's all over the place. It's not well organized.
And we haven't even talked about the lighting and how terrible the lighting is. I get that they were trying to be gritty, but again, when you throw in those ridiculous fonts and transitions,
noir.
Yeah, well, it reminded me of remember those shoot interviews that were on YouTube, where you could sit and listen to the Ultimate Warrior talk for 4 hours about how he hates wrestling.
Steve is referring to wrestling shoot interviews, and a shoot interview in wrestling means an interview, for those that aren't fans, that a wrestler is out of character, really the person behind the Ultimate Warrior, the person behind Hulk Hogan, answering questions really as they are as a human being.
Right, and those videos were just a one camera shoot on the wrestler, and they never cut away. You just sat there, and either you were watching it or you're not. There's no cuts, no nothing.
Yeah,
and that's what I thought.
They do at least.
What's that?
They do at least use a few different camera angles.
It's been so long, maybe, and it's possible that they did, but that's what I thought we were going to get with this. It was just going to be a bare bones, just the facts, and I use the term loosely, but and I think maybe that's what they were aiming for, but since they didn't have a long enough interview with Dan Akroyd, they had to throw in all the clips and stuff, and then he had to throw David Sereda had to throw in himself very uncharismatically asking questions, and so it's not sensational enough. It's not bare cold hard facts enough. So like
it's just weird. It's like listening to two guys just shoot the shit about UFOs. Yet sometimes like alien, like UFO, like sighting, quote unquote sighting footage is thrown up on the screen for you. The conversation is all over the place. Like when you're, a documentary, just like a work of fiction, needs to have like a beginning, middle, and end, and you need to tell a story.
Right.
You want to build to something. Just because it's a documentary doesn't mean that you don't need to like follow like a cohesive story structure.
And I mean, and even this show, Obscurity Now, we have a very rigid format that we must follow at all.
Although today we're definitely not following
it.
We have been all over the place, but as a result, I think, of them being all over the place.
I'd say it's been pretty good. It's worked out pretty well, I'd say.
It's very humble of you. You're a real Dan Akroyd. Real humble.
Oh, well, in that case, I would just continue rambling on about whatever question you ask.
No. Please get closer to the camera, Steve. I can't see all of your pores.
So anything else to add before we jump into the verdict section?
No, I'm ready to render a verdict.
All right.
Remember, you're rated. That's the question.
All right. Agent Yahel, do you think Dan Akroyd, Unplugged on UFOs, should be remembered for all of UFOlogists' history, or tossed into the black void of space where no one can hear it scream?
I mean, I was entertained at times, not in the way Dan Akroyd wanted me to. And by the way, at the end, towards the end of the documentary, like Dan Akroyd starts like, it's almost like he's backpedaling from himself. He starts saying like, to me, UFOs and all this stuff, it's just entertaining. It's entertaining to talk about. It's like entertainment to me. Do I think they're real? Yes, but it's entertaining. So it's like, what is this real? Is it not? It's like he's confusing the word. I think what he's trying to say is that it's interesting to him.
Right, but please don't misconstrue me as a David Icke style quack. I'm still a legitimate, force in Hollywood, and that's what
Britney Spears is calling me. I gotta go.
I'm friends
David
with
Sereda.
Britney Spears, and then later I have to go hang out with Tiffany. That's who the kids like, right?
Wow,
Tiffany.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say Christina Aguilera.
I wanted to go super
Britney's
dated.
Contemporary.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as remembering it or not, it's so like odd. It's odd because it's Dan Akroyd. If it was anybody else, it's an immediate forget about it, trash it, because it's uninteresting. But it's so like weird to see Dan Akroyd like this, and so unusual that it almost makes me want to remember it. But then you could literally watch the first like 5 to 10 minutes, and it's like you've watched the whole thing.
Right. Oh, I had a hard time. I wouldn't say it was a hard time getting through with it, but occasionally I would check like the time code, and I would be like, oh, I have 45 minutes more to go. Oh man.
Yeah. What I would say is I've seen, like I talked about earlier, I'm not someone that says like, oh yes, I don't think we've been visited by UFOs. Could it have happened? Sure, maybe, but I would need to see hard evidence. That being said, I've seen much better documentaries about UFOs that make a much better case for it, that they're more interesting. They at least make you think, even if you don't walk away believing whatever, that there's UFOs or whatever. So I think I'm going to go with this one should be obliterated. What say ye?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I pretty much agree with you. I mean, one of my favorite things about watching Unsolved Mysteries, both as a kid and as an adult, are like the reenactments with the bad acting.
Yes.
And they cannot afford to make those for Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs. Plus, as we've said, I mean, it's not really that kind of documentary. This was really just, I don't know, a conversation amongst friends that someone decided everyone needed to hear about or experience, I guess. I mean, that's what we've decided, and ultimately ends up being pretty boring. There's no real hard facts, and it's not sensational enough to be like, oh man, look at the guy in the rubber alien suit, like they used to do on sightings, or anything like
the amateurish editing.
Oh,
because you can do something that's low budget and still have it look competently made.
Right.
By the way, Smoke Monster in the chat said, it's bad when it's bad by UFO documentary standards.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I'll say that
the audio was good. The audio was like surprisingly decent.
At least they got that right. But I mean, they were just in one darkened room, so all you have to do is get your mic and a decent.
Hey, a lot of those shoot wrestling interviews have bad audio.
Right. It's true. So yeah, A+ in the audio there. But yeah, I mean, this is ultimately forgettable. Like, I would almost be more interested to check out, I think it's available maybe on YouTube, the show that got canceled, the Out There, because like there's an image on the Obscuritron right there of like
the Bat Boy. I think,
see, that's what I wanted. I wanted Dan Akroyd talking about Bat Boy and Sasquatch and like just ridiculous stuff.
You were hoping it was more like a tabloid,
Weekly World News kind of thing, or even more of a rep. I think it's because well, like I said, I wanted one or the other. I wanted over-the-top sensationalism or down-to-earth, cold, hard facts. But we just got something in the middle. It can't be either one. So with that, I believe that Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs shall be plugged in no more and will be obliterated. Goodbye.
The heathens have spoken. You are obliterated.
Well,
Steve, did you see the last thing Smoke Monster wrote?
No.
In the chat here. Maybe you should see that.
This is like when Joel forces the bots to say something nice about the. Thank you for the MST3K reference. Fantastic show.
Yeah. For those not watching, he said Joel forces the boss to do something nice about the movie on Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah.
This is mostly an audio format, Steven. Come on, pal.
I read it.
Don't go David Serrate on me. No, you read 3/4 of it.
Excuse me. Wow. Like I said, we've got
that's
rigid.
Like the biggest insult we can throw around here, David Serrate.
We've got rigid stand. Oh, I'm gonna start. Like every question that I ask now is gonna be David Serrate style. I'm gonna be like, so Yahel, after you watch the movie, now did it make you want to kill yourself and kill everyone around you, or did it make you want to go run for Congress and then?
And then if you ran for Congress and were elected and you were presented with a bill that would raise the amount of money that teachers are paid on a national level. However, to pay for that, you have to take away food at schools.
He was filling time. He was filling time. That's what he was doing. He's like, this has got to meet like the UFON standards of like slightly above 90 minutes. So I'm just going to ask the longest, most convoluted question and then edit Dan's response in there.
Steve, I think we should actually build Obscurity Now as, with your host, Stephen Honeycutt, Yahel Vasquez, and Gordon Cooper.
Yeah, and keep throwing them in. I mean, we could throw clips,
and then just throw like a clip of him just saying like the same thing every week from that UFO documentary.
Ooh, all right. If I can remember to do that, we're gonna do that.
I can't wait for Gordon Cooper's family to sue us.
Yeah. If the government hasn't already taken him out because they knew too much.
I hear that's not even the original Gordon Cooper.
It's just a clone, man. A reptilian clone, bro.
Well, I will say thankfully for Gordon Cooper, he died in 2004, a year before this was released. So he never got to see how his words were being twisted.
Wow. Poor guy. He really missed out.
Did you know, though, that he was an actor?
Gordon Cooper?
Yeah, he was in Primus. He was in Chips.
Wow. Well, good. I guess he was using that astronaut notoriety to break into Hollywood. I think more astronauts should do that.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's our show. What do you think about the paranormal? And by you, I mean the listener/viewer. What do you think about Dan Akroyd Unplugged on UFOs, or your thoughts on UFOs or the paranormal in general? I would love to know what your paranormal activity encounters are. Put it in the comments, and then we'll discuss.
And I want to know, did this, you, the listener or viewer, did this change your mind about Dan Akroyd at all?
Yeah.
If you were a fan or weren't a fan before this, make you more of a fan, less of a fan? I'm curious to see what people think. And did you know that Dan Akroyd was a little crazy?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, it's like harmless crazy, not like.
I agree. And he's, I mean, he believes this stuff, but he comes off, I will say, as if you showed him hard evidence that everything that he was saying is clearly not true. I think he would accept it.
Yes.
He'd be disappointed, but I mean, we've had a lot of fun kind of poking fun at him, but as far as someone believing weird conspiracies go, he's pretty level-headed.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, I doubt we'll be seeing him on Alex Jones anytime soon.
yeah, maybe on Alex Mack, I don't know. Is that around? Is she
that show's canceled?
Yeah,
I was hanging out with Alex Mack yesterday.
What show with a girl that's around the same age as Britney Spears when the show got hot? Look, Steve, Dan
Akroyd does is hang out with 18-year-old girls, 17 to 18-year-old girls. But we should definitely cover Alex Mack in the future. But speaking of the future, make sure you join us next Sunday as we continue to unearth more obscure media only on Obscurity Now. See you next week. Bye-bye.
See you out there.
You've been enjoying Obscurity Now, a podcast that's recorded live to tape and streamed to Twitch and YouTube. Subscribe so you never miss an episode or hilarious quip. Take us with you by following the download links provided in the show notes to wherever you get podcasts. And take notice of our various social media links. If that's what you're into, I'm not here to judge. And make sure you join us live next week at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific as we continue to discuss more obscure media only on Obscurity Now.